Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of NATO's 2020 virtual annual training conference. My name is Chris Fetzer, and I serve as the Executive Director of Northern Arizona Council of Governments based in Flagstaff, and I also have the privilege of serving as NATO's second Vice President. I'd like to welcome you all to this session, 2020 Foresight, not Hindsight, which seems like an appropriate fit for our 2020 conference, given everything that's occurred since March. I know I'm not alone when I say I'm disappointed we're not in Cleveland. I personally was really looking forward to it. Never been to Cleveland before, but it's great that we're still able to convene our conference through a virtual platform. Today's speaker, Josh Davies, will walk us through how the events of the past 7 months have resulted in an accelerated shift across the workforce within our organizations and across our regions at the state and national levels and throughout the nation's education system. All of that, coupled with changes in technology and how we work, and the ripple effects of recovery from the pandemic. Josh will discuss the urgency to start preparing now for the coming reality by building a resilient and inclusive workforce with the skills needed to be successful. His presentation will talk about current opportunities to evolve practices and develop solutions that ensure everyone has an equal opportunity for success in the future. He'll share his thoughts on how the future will have a greater need for leaders at all levels in organizations, and that they'll require a different set of skills and abilities. As the session title implies, it's said hindsight is 2020, but strong leaders are instead using it as foresight. Josh is the CEO of the Center for Work Ethic Development based in Denver, Colorado. The center is committed to developing workplace skills in the global workforce, partnering with organizations in all 50 states and across 6 countries. They equip trainers and teachers to build the workforce of the 21st century. So before I turn this session over to Josh, if you think of a question during his presentation, please write it in the question box on your screen and we'll get to it before the session ends. As a reminder, the session is being recorded and it'll be made available to conference attendees in the next few weeks. So with that, please welcome Josh Davies. The floor is yours, Josh. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Chris, and thank all of you for being here virtually. While we'd all want to be together in person, this is really the best way to try and make something happen and use this opportunity to still learn, grow, and share with each other. My name is Josh Davies. Again, I'm the CEO of the Center for Work Ethic Development. Probably most of you have not heard of the Center for Work Ethic Development. We're an organization, again, based in Denver, Colorado. We tend to partner with folks who are doing job training, helping folks get the soft skills they need in order to be successful. And that's in education, workforce, nonprofit, corrections, anywhere and everywhere. And so we get an opportunity to work all over the country. And I get a chance then to see all sorts of different things that are happening. Best practices, worst practices, challenges, and opportunities. So with that in mind, I decided to try and figure out what it was that was making this year so different. So before we go any further, I want to take you into a time machine. We're going to just work with me here. We're going to go in this time machine and we're going to go back in time. So just imagine right now you are in the time machine. We are headed back in time. We're going to a magical place somewhere called New Year's Day 2020. I don't know if you remember it. It was a wonderful day, right? It was about the start of a new decade. There were goals, there were dreams, there were so many things we were going to make happen. We really felt like we were on the cusp of, oh my goodness, then coronavirus hit, right? For many of us, we remember the exact day that it got real for us. But regardless, it shut everything down. As a result, what happened? Massive unemployment, right? We saw huge layoffs. And in fact, still today, we're looking at unemployment rates that are way above average, right? We went from historically low to historically bad. We now find that we've got about 800,000 to 1 million new people filing for unemployment every single week. It's crazy. Oh, and to top it all off, of course, we also then got reintroduced to some of our social justice issues across the United States. And as if that wasn't enough, right? We had murder hornets. I mean, my goodness, this year has been crazy. I don't know for you, but it feels like it will never end. I hear all the time this idea that this is an unprecedented year. There are unprecedented things happening. But I would argue it's actually not unprecedented. What we're seeing exposed is nothing that's new. It's just being accelerated, right? It's like this guy pouring a can of gasoline onto it and going fire, right? All it's doing is accelerating and exploding. 2020 has been that accelerant to several trends that have already been existing throughout the last 10 and sometimes even 20 years. So let's take a look at 4 of those trends, 4 things that I've seen sort of emerging over the past 2 decades. First of all, there's this idea about the future of work, right? That automation, artificial intelligence, it's just changing things. And the nature of the work that we do is continuously changing. That's one of the trends we see. Another one is the interconnectivity of people. We're finding more and more we can work anywhere, anytime, interact with everyone, a limitless supply of connection and information. Another trend is not so good. It's this growing divide between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, the big and the small. We've seen that divide growing and growing, again, over the last 10 and 20 years. And another problem that we've had is with the educational system. The education system in America was designed in a different era. And while we're trying to catch up, we find more and more as we talk to employers around the country that our education system is not producing the students that we need in order to be successful in the future. Well, you throw all 4 of those factors in, and one of the things that people talk about is the impact it's going to have on the workforce of America. And again, we talk about an accelerant. Gabe Del Porto, who's the CEO of Udacity, estimated that worldwide, 1 billion people would lose their jobs over the next 10 years. And he thinks that COVID has been an accelerant for 9 years, right? We have ramped up everything. And there's all this talk about losing jobs and what's going to happen and all these different things. But it's important to remember, as we talk about the impact that technology and evolution have, that when it comes to the workforce, there's a key concept. It's called creative disruption. Creative disruption is this simple premise that yes, technology will come and it will get rid of some jobs, right? That's just the nature of things, but it will also create new jobs. And what creative disruption has proven over time is that technology creates more new jobs than it gets rid of, right? When you think about it, how many of you right now have anybody you know that's employed as a switchboard operator, right? This was a big career, and now no one is employed as a switchboard operator. Instead, what do we have? The other side of telecommunications, mobile app development, right? Where people are designing applications for smartphones, something we didn't even know existed 10 years ago. And it's become quite a cottage industry in many states and cities, right? The key thing to know is that technology will not get rid of jobs. It will create jobs. And if you look at the history of American employment, right, we see that over time. It just keeps going up, 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 and up. Now, depressions and recessions, that impacts employment, but we just keep going back over and over again. But what does happen is that where those jobs are located and which industries they're in, that dramatically changes, right? If you just go back 150 years to 1850, you'd see in America, almost 50% of the workforce was in farming and agriculture, 50%. Today, it's less than 2%. So in essence, we lost 48% of the jobs at the time. But what happened? We replaced them in other areas, blue collar, white collar, service, all the different areas that now make up the modern workforce, right? The problem isn't that technology takes some jobs. It always does, and it just recalibrates them. The problem is when technology takes your job. That's when we run into real issues, right? How do you respond to that? How do you deal with it? Because technology is evolving and changing. Do we deal with it like the Luddites in ancient England? The Luddites, a bunch of textile workers, were getting displaced because a new merchant came in and opened a brand new factory filled with automatic looms that were going to take 19 out of 20 jobs. People were furious. They didn't know what to do. So did they go get training? Did they get educated? Did they try and figure out? No. What'd they do? In the middle of the night, they snuck in, smashed all the massive equipment that's in there, and then assumed that would save their jobs. Of course, yes, they destroyed the factory, but the technology didn't go away, and their jobs were eventually lost. The reality is that technology is like toothpaste. You can't get it back into the tube. What you have to do is see what's happening and evolve and adapt. And it doesn't matter how successful you are today. What we all have to understand is you can be amazing. But if you don't evolve, you probably won't be around. Let me give you a perfect example of this. A great American success story, an industrial icon, a little company by the name of Kodak. Now, many of you probably are familiar with Kodak. I mean, just like me, right? You probably had a Kodak camera growing up. In fact, almost everybody did. Kodak cameras were just synonymous with Americana. You know, it's like on your 12th birthday, it's just what you got. What's interesting about Kodak and cameras, though, is that Kodak made virtually no money selling their cameras. It was almost a lost leader. What they wanted to do was to get as many cameras into as many people's hands as possible. And in 1975, at one of the peaks of Kodak, they had an 85% market share. 85% of all the cameras sold were Kodak cameras. But what's interesting, of course, is the reason why they wanted to give the cameras away is because where Kodak makes all its money was on film, right? Buying, developing, processing. Film was where they made all of their money. And if you thought 85% was good, in 1975, Kodak had a 90% market share of film, right? It was a virtual monopoly, and they're making money hand over fist. Now, 1975 looks like a great year. And in fact, for Kodak, it was a real turning point because 1975 was also the year that an engineer finally got a meeting with the CEO of Kodak. He comes into his office, presents him with this. The CEO is a little stunned and surprised. What they'd been trying to do was to make things smaller, more compact, easier to use, less parts. This thing was ugly, bulky, wouldn't even fit in a suitcase. The CEO said, "What is this?" The engineer said, "Sir, this is the future of photography." The CEO was confused. He said, "Sir, you'll notice there's no film here. It has this little cassette on the side. What this device does is it stores images digitally onto that cassette, and then you can replay them, print them off of that cassette. You don't even need any film anymore. It's all reusable." So, kind of taking a thought here, right? The CEO of Kodak, where they're 90% market share in film, where they're making all their money. What do you suppose his response was to a filmless camera? Yeah, yeah, get this out of here, right? I don't even want to see it anymore. He told them, stop. And what's sad about that is in 1975, Kodak had the opportunity to patent digital photography and instead said, make it go away. So how does that work out for Kodak? Probably you already know this part, right? It's not well, right? Kodak, while hitting its peak there around 1970 and 80, by 2012 is bankrupt. Wow, out of business, from an icon to nothing. But look, Kodak is not alone. I mean, history is full of amazing companies that didn't adapt, right? It's estimated that in the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have gone extinct, right? There's the Kodak that's there, but also don't forget the Blockbusters of the world, right? The Nokias. Nokia basically dominated the cell phone market and failed to adapt. Compaq never really adapted to the whole piece of having laptops, right? Each of these companies has their own issues. And the problem is they weren't aware of what the disruptors were in the industry, right? When you look at companies that are successful today, they realized what the next disruptors were and figured out what that direction was putting the rest of the world. And so as a result, what we need to do as we head into post 2020, as we try and figure out how we can adapt, what we need to do is try and figure out what are those disruptors and where is it pointing us. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some parts of technology that we know are coming down the pike. There's really two key things that we know are going to be coming over the next 10, 15 years: automation and artificial intelligence. Now, I'm not a tech geek, so I'm not going to get into super specs on all this, but here's what you need to know about automation. Automation and robotics in general has been growing and growing and growing across the world. We oftentimes think of automation primarily as something that has to do more with factories and those kinds of things, right? Industrial robots. In fact, you can see here the growth of industrial robots around 15 to 20% every single year. But what's important to know is it's not actually industrial robots that are feeling the growth of automation. It's actually in non-industrial uses. So what are non-industrial uses? Home, office, right? You may not think of it, but you probably have some robots and automation in your home. Now, not like the robot from the Jetsons, but I'm talking about another robot you might have in your house. Your smart speaker. Maybe it's your Ring doorbell, right? We see more and more of this technology that's automating things, not necessarily like a robotic arm, but it's automating functions and features. Automation is continuing to grow, both in industrial and non-industrial uses, and it's going to have a profound impact as it continues to grow. Because not only do we have robotics and automation, it's getting smarter. Artificial intelligence is one of the concepts just to be aware of. And again, you can read way more about this if you want to. But the key thing to know about artificial intelligence is they won't be humans, but they will be processing and moving things as quickly as they are. Why? Because there's a little concept known as Moore's Law. Moore's Law basically says this: the power and speed of a computer will double about every 18 months. And if you look over the history of time, from the very first analytical engine in 1900 through today, that trend has continued. If you look on the screen right here, you'll see those little red dots. Those little red dots each represent a new growth in technology, a new speed, right? Maybe it was the Intel Pentium chip, right? I remember when the Pentium came out, people were like, oh my goodness, nothing will ever be this fast. And 18 months later, we got the Pentium 2. 12 months later, we got the Pentium 3. 6 months later, we got the Pentium 4. It just keeps going because that's the nature of how growth works. Now, the reason why that's important, if you go and you start to extrapolate where Moore's Law takes us, eventually we get computers that are processing things at a speed, not necessarily of an insect, but of the human brain. By 2030, computers will be processing information as quickly as a human. So we'll have robots everywhere, and they'll be just as fast thinking as we are. This is the part where I start to get a little scared and maybe thinking that the Terminator might actually be a documentary, right? But it's not, so don't worry. But what we do know is that artificial intelligence and automation are going to have profound impacts on those 4 emerging trends we saw before, and are going to be having significant societal, educational, and workforce challenges. So let's take a look, knowing what we know from the past, knowing what we see ahead, what direction we're going. What do we need to know so that we can get prepared? Because we may have had a longer runway before, but 2020 and everything that's happened this year has forced us to move faster. It's shortened that runway, and we see the impact in lots of places. Specifically, we talk about 4 different areas that we're going to really find the impact. Number 1, there will be a permanent elimination of jobs. Where those jobs are and how deep, that's what we want to get into. Secondly, employment as we know it is also going to be redefined. We'll have to kind of take that into consideration. Third, we'll see increasing business consolidation. And finally, there will be a significant disruption in post-secondary education. So let's start with that first one, losing jobs, because that's something that people talk a lot about. But let's see what's happened, right? We know total US employment is down, right? It's not where it was because we still haven't gotten all the jobs back from the pandemic here in this year. But it's not just that we've lost jobs. What's important to know is where those jobs are. The vast majority of jobs that have been lost during this pandemic time are low wage jobs. Now, there are some medium and some high wage jobs, but for the most part, it's all low wage positions and not in equally distributed, right? We're seeing food and drink, retail, travel and tourism, right? Those are the industries that have been most impacted, right? We see here 37 million jobs, potentially at permanent risk. And you'll notice that dark red bar, almost all of them are low wage jobs. The scary part, what the University of Chicago tells us, is that there is a 42% probably of all the jobs lost this year will never come back, either because an establishment closes or because they're replaced with more efficient technology. That's really scary. And what does that start to tell us? What does that point us to? The reality of this. What we're going to see is the end of creative disruption. Automation and artificial intelligence, just like every other technology, will continue to create jobs, But the problem is the pace of where we're losing jobs can't keep up. Let me give you a perfect example to sort of a canary in the coal mine, something that we've been seeing happen for a few years that again has been accelerated in 2020. Retail. Retail is one of those places that is kind of lurking under the surface because if you're not paying attention, things look rosy, right? If you look at just retail sales over the last 4 years, they're up about 3%, right? Everything's rosy. People are making lots of money, great stocks. But the reality is that's not happening at the physical location, right? If you look since 2000, basically bricks and mortar, department stores, and all the rest of them basically have flat sales over the last 20 years. Almost all the growth that we've seen happen is in e-commerce. Even for traditional retailers, Walmart's, Target's, they're seeing more and more of their sales driven through those online channels. And again, you want to talk about the accelerant of 2020, right? Overall retail sales are down this year about 10%, but online sales, e-commerce, is up almost a third. This creates a huge imbalance between the real estate and where the sales are. And so what we started to see is truly stores closing. And again, it didn't begin this year. People talk about all the stores closing, but it started really in 2017. 2017 was the first year where we had more stores closed nationwide than open. And that trend continued, right? We saw last year massive amounts of major retailer bankruptcy. There were 16 national retailers, a new record. We never had that many national retailers go out of business before, right? Payless Shoe Source alone had to close 2,500 stores. Now, 16 was a record. Unfortunately, 2020 is always like hold my beer because we right now have 26 national retailers that have closed, including Lord & Taylor, the oldest continually operating retail outlet in America. Wow, massive amounts. And I tell you what, the real problem is of the ones that are temporarily closed right now, how many of them will be permanently closed? Like you look at shopping and retail, almost 60% of the retail stores that temporarily closed are at risk of permanently closing. It's significant, right? It's almost 25,000 stores nationwide predicted to close by the end of the year. UBS, the investment firm, does a lot of work on the retail space. Last year, they came out with a report, kind of a doom and gloom thing that said that 75,000 stores across the United States would close by 2026. Well, this year, they had to adjust that. It's now 100,000 stores by 2025. This is a huge, huge impact on our local communities and our employment bases. Because when you look nationwide, retail is one of the top workforce areas across the country, right? Some states have almost 500,000 people working in retail. When those jobs go away, it becomes a problem, right? This year, we've lost 500,000 nationwide. And why is that a real issue? From a workforce standpoint, most of you know this already, but the retail industry has some real challenges because when you talk about transferable technical skills, they're very few. Most of them don't have college degrees. They have challenges with literacy and numeracy. Now, they have a host of soft skills, but we have to figure out how to harness that because otherwise we have a huge glut of skill mismatch because these retail workers don't have the technical skills that are needed in the jobs that are open. Wow, that's going to be huge. We just have to be prepared and know that that's coming. But that's not the only thing that's coming. One of the other challenges that's going to be facing everyone is this idea of redefining what it means to be employed. Now, employment, again, has evolved over time. There was a time when you go work for one company, you'd retire, you'd get the Rolex. Then there was a time where you could switch jobs, but you stay in the same career. Then you got to a point where you have maybe multiple careers. Now we're in a space where it's basically like a side hustle, where so many people have some other gig on the side or something else that's going on. Well, there'll be a new stage coming next, a whole idea of virtual employment. And this trend, again, has been happening for a while. You look at just traditional 9-to-5 employees, those have been declining for a long time. Even if you look at full versus part-time, after the Great Recession, you notice that most of the jobs that came back were part-time. And that's going to be a challenge, but it's not just part-time jobs. Look at non-traditional employment. E-lancers, freelancers, all of these places have nearly doubled in the last 20 years. More and more companies are deciding that they don't need full-time employees, that they instead are going to use contractors, e-lancers, and in today's day, where you can work anywhere, anytime, what we're finding is that more and more companies are not going to be replacing their full-time white-collar workers that were laid off. Almost a third. That's going to have huge impacts as well, because what we see moving is that a lot of people have access, well, I don't know about access, but had the opportunity to work at home, right? Almost 6 out of 10 folks did. But again, it's not about even. What we see here is that if you have a bachelor's degree or more, your job probably at 2/3 could work remotely. But if you don't have a high school diploma, or if you just have a high school diploma, odds are that your job does not allow you to work remotely. So what ends up happening is that these people don't get an opportunity to work in this global virtual world because they don't have the education needed to get those jobs, right? So what happens? They end up doing low-skilled gig work, Uber, WAG, some of those things. But the outcome is the same. People no longer work for a single employer. People are now out and about working for anyone, everyone, whether or not that's, again, doing Uber driving or consulting, which seems kind of cool, right? Because you get set your own hours. You don't have to have anybody telling you what to do. But the problem is this: as we move more and more to this virtual environment, what we see is the traditional link between employees and employers related to benefits gets severed. What happens if you get sick? How do you pay for healthcare? What about your 401k? These are all serious challenges as we move into this new space. And again, COVID and 2020 are just pushing these things to move even faster. But it's not just the work world, it's who's hiring. Because what we're seeing across America has been business consolidation. Again, not a new trend. It's been happening really for about 50 years. We see more and more business consolidation where big companies buy smaller companies, or they merge and they come together, right? If you take media, for instance, if you turn on the TV, you would swear there are more channels than you know what to do with. But the reality is that 90% of the content on TV today is controlled by 6 major media giants. Wow. Just put that in perspective. In 1983, that same 90% was controlled by 50 companies, right? More and more just getting swallowed up. But it's not alone there. Consumer products is a great example, because you think, oh, there's so many different brands, there's so many things, there's so much. But the reality is that almost every single consumer brand is basically owned by one of 10 global brands: Coke, Pepsi, General Mills, Kellogg's, Mars, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Nestle, and Kraft. Control basically everything. And it's not just that they control everything. What we're seeing again happen in this pandemic is that we're moving away from this idea that you have to go to a particular store to get a particular product. What we're seeing is that online retailers are able to sell multitudes of different brands and products and go directly to the consumer without having to go through another location. What does this mean? More and more business consolidation. Because if you don't need all those different places, don't need all those different brands, all you have to do is swallow up competitors or just diversify your reach, right? You look at the growth of mega deals, companies that are buying other companies. It has been on an uptick since the tax change back in 2017, where companies got more and more of their revenue they got to keep. What they're doing with it, more often than not, is buying up other companies. A perfect example: Walmart just purchased TikTok. Yeah, right. You talk about diversification in different places, but it gives them an online channel to help promote some of their goods. Amazon, a couple years ago, bought Whole Foods. Whole Foods, a bricks and mortar grocery store. It again is about consolidation. And at the end of the day, when we move to the future, what I really see happening is the brands and the companies that will be most powerful, most important, will be the ones that control distribution, that get everything to a particular person or to a particular household, right? Like digital content, which is why you see Amazon being so big in that space. I see it really over the next probably 20 years that there will become 3 major, huge international distributors. It's going to be Amazon, Walmart, and a little company out of China called Alibaba. These 3 companies will likely continue to grow, continue to dominate, and just continue to swallow up smaller competitors. Let me give you a perfect example. Let's just look at stock price and how they've done over the last year, right? Overall, the Dow is down slightly year over year. But what you see Walmart is up almost 10%. Alibaba is up almost a third. Amazon is up over 40%. These companies get richer and richer. And what does that mean? Fewer and fewer opportunities, though it looks like we've got all the same choices. Business consolidation will continue to happen and will likely speed as a result of these three companies. So there's going to be a permanent elimination of jobs. We're going to have redefined everything and go to this virtual employment model. We've got more business consolidation. What else could be happening? Well, the fourth trend is pretty disturbing because it focuses on the challenges of post-secondary education in America. Because post-secondary education is an outdated concept. I mean, not entirely, right? We talk about a bachelor's degree being your ticket to the middle class, and it still is. But the problem is, since 2000, the value of that degree has plateaued. At the same time, the value of the degree has plateaued. What we see is that state support of public post-secondary education has declined. You can see those blue and red bars. Those are 48 of the 50 states that have had declines in post-secondary public education support. So what ends up happening? Almost everywhere across the board, prices go up because they're no longer being subsidized, right? Just in the year 2000, if you went to a public post-secondary four-year university, the state would probably cover almost 2/3 of your education. You only had to pay for a third. Today, that is entirely flipped, right? And we're now having to pay more and more in fees, in tuition, in all of those things. And what ends up happening is that when public education has to raise their rates, private education matches it because they want to be seen as more valuable. It's really a dangerous curve to be on. But the reality is what ends up happening, costs go through the roof. But again, the value of that degree doesn't go anywhere. So what ends up happening? You already know this, right? Student loan debt. So what happens? People don't want to go to school. If you look at the top reasons why people don't go to college and post-secondary, it's not because they don't get in. It's because they don't see it as valuable. Add to that another challenge in post-secondary education, and that is demographic shifts. What we've seen is that while enrollment had been growing and growing and growing, with the new Generation Z coming in, there are going to be fewer college-age students than there have ever been before. This is a huge demographic challenge for a lot of post-secondary institutions that have gotten used to being flush with lots of students in that millennial generation. So what else could go wrong? Well, COVID, right? What we see happen with this move for many universities and colleges to go to an online or a hybrid environment, students simply just don't want to go. They don't see the value. On-campus enrollment's down 15%. It's a $23 billion hit. Scarier yet, freshmen are choosing to defer their enrollment. Almost half of the freshman class, it's estimated, will defer their enrollment this year, which may not seem like a big deal, but almost half of the people who defer never end up going back. That's huge. And again, has significant issues when it comes to both racial and gender disparity. Here's the problem. We're not done with the pandemic as it relates to education, right? This was an estimation that was done with 3 different scenarios, whether or not the virus was contained and you only had to go online until fall of 2020, which already we've blown through. The middle one, where we were online until January, which we're still teetering on the brink, or the third one, where the pandemic escalates and we still have to be online all the way through next fall. What's scary is if you look in that center area, what you can see is that 66% of private not-for-profit four-year universities and colleges have significant shortfalls between their revenues and expenses. 26% of them have over a 20% gap between revenues and expenses. This is going to be a big deal because these universities are not necessarily all flush with cash, especially smaller colleges and universities. So what do we see happening? The scary part is this. It's estimated that maybe we could lose 345 private institutions in the next 6 years. They simply don't have the ability to weather this kind of economic storm. They were already a little bit on brink before then, but with COVID, it simply got rid of their runway. These 4 changes, these 4 impacts that we're going to find happening over the next several years are scary. I mean, I don't know about you, but this is about the time where I'm just going through everything. I'm thinking to myself, right? I don't even want to know what's happening next. Why are you telling me this? Because it's easy to get scared. right? It's easy. But here's what I need you to do. Instead of just freaking out about all the things that are going to be happening, do me a favor. You can probably see my camera, but I want to take your hand, put it up like this, take your thumb and your forefinger and put it over here and make me a promise. Promise that you will not get scared. Promise that you will not be afraid. Promise me that you will not hide your head in the sand, but instead take this opportunity to try and see what's next, to be that next evolution, and to instead get prepared. Because if we evolve, if we channel that inner Boy Scout or Girl Scout, what we can do is take what we know is happening and better prepare ourselves, our communities, and our workforces for the reality of the coming future. So with that in mind, what I want to do now is spend the rest of our time together talking about 5 different strategies, 5 different things that we can learn from what's happened this year that we can use to better prepare for the future. And again, these are things that you can keep in mind for yourself, for your kids, but mostly I want you to think about them for your communities, because these things are really important for us to start to do today. So let's start with number 1. The first thing we have to do is stop repeating repetitive reiterations, right? We know this. Robots are going to take some jobs away. We don't know which ones. People estimate and guess. But here's what we do know. Jobs that are routine, consistently doing the same thing over and over again, are the jobs that will be replaced by robots. It's estimated the job that we're most likely to lose to automation are actually telemarketers. 99% likelihood where you lose telemarketers. And I'm thinking that's probably a good thing, right? The problem is, of course, you will still get all the telemarketing calls. They will all just be really smart robots. But what you need to know is the second most likely job to go away are accountants and auditors, because they're doing repetitive tasks, they're getting information, and then they're disseminating it. Things that are easily done by artificial intelligence and automation. And again, these trends have been happening for a little while. When you look at the job growth post-Great Recession, you can see it is almost all entirely in non-routine tasks, both manual and cognitive. You look there as red lines, those red lines show that in routine tasks on both sides, those jobs just never have come back, right? And it's estimated when you look back over the last 30 years that 88% of all the job loss simply because they were repetitive. These things are important to know, because what we have to do is figure out where the jobs are going to be that are non-routine in the future. Because if you just look at your basic LMI data, it'll just tell you that here's the growth in these particular industries or particular career sectors. But what we need to do is break that down further, right? When you look at job growth by industry, it's important to know there are very, very different growth levels. Let's go to the bottom 2 here, construction and health and social assistance. What you'll notice by construction is it's one of the top growing jobs. But what you need to know is that most of that bar is purple and blue. Purple and blue indicates repetitive. Those will likely be replaced. So it's really not that much growth. On the other hand, if you look at health and social assistance, you can see almost the entire bar is red and gold, non-routine. Figure out which jobs, which industries are not routine, and try and figure out how we can steer people in those places and do workforce development around those areas. We have to stop repeating repetitive reiterations. And for each of you, think about your jobs. What's repetitive that you do consistently? Because here's what I'm going to tell you. That part of your job will go away. Probably not your entire job, but anything that was routine. Once we get past this idea of routine versus non-routine and kind of see which sectors to go in, what other skills do we need? Well, what's interesting and somewhat counterintuitive is that actually, when we get a high-tech future, the skills that will be most in demand are high touch. What do I mean? The things that robots can't do: connection, empathy, right? The way that we relate to each other, right? There are so many good things that happen as a result of technology and distance, right? Telemedicine has just taken off this year, and that's fantastic. Why? Because we know in so many of our rural communities and in our urban poor areas, it's difficult to get and keep doctors. But with telemedicine, you can get a doctor from anywhere, anytime. More and more wearable technology will allow them to read your vital signals and do all the diagnosis without even having to step foot in a hospital. That's great. But the problem is this: if you're getting a terminal diagnosis, you don't want to have the conversation with this person, right? Human connection is so powerful. And as we talk about high tech, it becomes even more important because technology is dehumanizing just by itself. Great technology companies have realized the role that humans and high touch play. A perfect example, Apple. Apple stores in particular, if you look at retail, are one of the top performing retails in terms of sales per square foot. And part of the reason is that the Apple stores don't have that much product in them, right? It's just a little bit here and there, but it's mostly filled with people because people make the connection. People help get others comfortable with the technology. Apple has realized that high touch is the key to their high tech success. On the other hand, look at a company like Best Buy, right? You go to a Best Buy store, there's nothing but product and a few salespeople hanging out here and there, right? It's hard to find people. You have to kind of do everything on your own. Well, what we've learned in 2020 is that I can get reviews. I can do all my comparison shopping online and probably have more information. I'll order it from anywhere. If I need to pick it up at a Best Buy, I will, but I don't need to go in a big, bulky box warehouse anymore. That's how it works. High touch becomes more valuable. And in fact, it's not just high touch overall. There are certain skills that will be in demand more than any other and hard to find. When you look at it in the future, they're not technology skills. They're not STEM skills. The skills that will be most important, most essential, and the hardest to hire will be critical thinking and problem solving. How do we develop those? How do we really focus on those skills? Other skills that will be critically important are oral communication, organization, teamwork, and the ability to work with diversity. What we need to realize is that critical thinking and problem solving skills aren't nice to have. They're going to be need to have because they will set us apart no matter what job, what industry, or what part of the country we're in. Those are the skills that the future workforce will have to have. Already, when you look at critical thinking, again, it's been growing and growing and growing. You've seen a huge increase over the past 3 years, and the jobs are paying more because those skills are in demand. Focus on high touch skills, the soft skills, the people skills, the connection. Figure out how we can be intentional developing those as we are intentional about technical skills. The third thing we have to do, we have to evolve apprenticeships in America. Apprenticeships are a great model, and it's been around in America for over 200 years. We've had really robust apprenticeship programs. What is it? It's about earning and learning, right? I don't have to probably tell any of you about apprenticeships, right? But it's an opportunity for people to come in, do some work, get some education, and get paid, and get that and work their way through. Now, they've always been pretty good, but they'll become even more important because what we see happening is the jobs that are going to go away in every single field tend to be more entry level, regardless of whether that's paralegal, in dentistry, wherever that is, right? It's estimated that 70% of entry level jobs will go away. The first rung of the ladder is going to be gone, but we still will need to get people up to the next 3, 4, 5, 6 rungs. Apprenticeships allow people to still develop those skills, get that entry level position without having to technically be an employee. Apprenticeships are awesome. Now, one of the things we've seen over the last several years with an emphasis from this administration is that more and more people are becoming apprentices. But the problem with apprentices as it's currently set is it's, again, not created equal, right? When you look at the overwhelming number of apprentices in America, they're almost all in construction trades and manufacturing. 2 areas, again, that we know are going to be going away, but are vastly overrepresented. When you look at the industries where we're going to see the most growth in non-repetitive tasks, like healthcare and information, very, very limited selections, right? What we need to do is figure out how to take the earn and learn apprenticeship model and apply it outside of the places that we think are apprentice jobs. How do we do it in banking? Again, in IT and healthcare, right? How do we make these things work and take that model and apply it somewhere else? But it's not just that apprentices are unevenly matched in terms of job industry. Apprenticeship, unfortunately, is also really bad in terms of the workforce. When you look at it, the vast majority are men. Almost 93% of all apprentices are men, despite the fact that women make up 52% of the workforce. Additionally, we see vastly underrepresented numbers of Black and Latinos when it comes to this as well. What we have to do is evolve what apprentices mean and how we communicate, how we reach out to apprentices, how we reach out to businesses and educational partners. So to help me do this, I've just a couple of ideas, just some things to work with. One, you want to make sure that if you have apprenticeship programs, you're marketing to the students and a diverse group. This is an example from the Fire Up apprenticeship program. It's actually in Great Britain, but you see diverse people doing these jobs. The idea that we market to who we want to be rather than who we are is a critical piece of this. But many of us don't even have that sort of step that we have because we haven't even set up apprentices in non-traditional fields. One of the resources to help you do that is an organization called CareerWise. CareerWise helps local entities combine employers, education, and workforce to come together to create robust, approved apprenticeship programs. They operate all over the country and are doing amazing work, especially in non-traditional fields. Again, if you want to find out more, you can Google it or you can go to careerwise.com. The fourth thing we need to really be aware of is the evolution between degrees and skills. Why? Because what we're finding, again, as post-secondary education is breaking down, that this traditional path with a four-year degree isn't necessarily the best way to measure whether or not someone has the skills in order to be successful. I mean, for many of us, the idea of a college diploma has been sort of a proxy, right? We assume that if someone finished 4 years of college, they've got some ability to work on their own, they've done teamwork, right? They sort of mature in some different ways, but there's no way to prove it. What we find is actually education and your grade point average are some of the worst predictors of workplace success. The number one best match is if the skills an employer has match the job seeker, right? A skills match, not too surprisingly, is the best predictor of a successful hiring outcome. Like academic achievement, education, way low. What we need to do is figure out how we can do a better job of quantifying, measuring, and then credentialing skills. Let me give you a perfect example of one of the problems with our traditional model. This right here is a CNC machine. This is from a factory in Kentucky. It was in a small town. The problem is, once someone retires, it's hard to find people to take over their job. Why? Because they needed someone with at least 5 years of experience, who had at least a 2-year degree and an industry NIMS certification, or at least that's what they'd always hired for. Well, the problem is, when this guy retired, they couldn't find anybody. The machine sat idle for almost a full year, costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what they do? They hired a consultant, said, let's look at things differently. Let's do a skills task analysis, figure out what skills are necessary, and hire for those rather than what we've traditionally done. They did the analysis. They found out to run this machine, you need good hand-eye coordination, the ability to switch tasks frequently, and attention to detail. So they went out and tried to find somebody in a small Kentucky town with those 3 skills. And you know what? They found him. His job, however, was not in another factory. He was a sushi chef. Yeah, a sushi chef. Why? Attention to detail, fine motor skills, and the ability to switch tasks frequently. What's hilarious about the story, but also very true, is that sushi chef is now the lead trainer on that machine, despite none of the traditional credentials, because skills are what we find matter more than anything else. Degrees will be the price of entry. They'll get your foot in the door, but the skills will make you successful. How do we quantify them? Well, again, there's different resources that are out there. I wanted to highlight Skillful. Skillful is a nonprofit combination between the Merkle industry and LinkedIn that's working with employers to help them change traditional hiring so that you're not just doing things the way they've always done, and instead trying to do more of that skills match, where they analyze what skills are necessary and hire based on that. Another great example is Opportunity at Work. Again, another nonprofit. Opportunity at Work is really about how to identify stars, people who are skilled through alternative routes, people who may be working right now at some other location, but have developed the skills necessary to get to that next job. But unfortunately, because they don't have a degree, they don't have a credential, there's no way of proving that they have the skills necessary to be successful. And this is holding people back. In fact, they estimate it's to the tune of about $6 billion in lost revenue just from the stars that they have already identified. So let's get to the last thing. This is important for all of us. And we have to remember, we have to continuously evolve, update, and learn. We've got to get a mindset about continuous lifelong learning. Because the problem is, for many people, they look at education as a one and done, right? I'm going to get my degree, I'll be done. But that's not really the way the world works, right? We have to continually be updating our skills, but we can't always do it now, again, in a traditional 4-year environment. Why? Because people need time and money to do that. And more often than not, people who need to get reskilled don't have time and money. They need to get hired right away. Right? When you asked what more than any other number of the people who were recently laid off in this pandemic, what kind of educational reskilling would they need? It wasn't a 4-year degree, it wasn't a 2-year degree, it was basic skills training. Second most, doing some sort of non-degree credential. More and more, we have to find alternative ways to help people get the skills they need, because the old ways are not going to be there and aren't practical for the reality of where we are in our workforce. What we have to do is think outside the box. A great example is Google. Google has done a partnership with Coursera. They've launched a whole series of Google credentials. It's a 6-month online course that costs a fraction of what a 4-year degree would cost. You can do it all online. It's in 3 different areas. And what's interesting is that Google has said this certificate is the equivalent in their hiring process as a 4-year degree. And Google's not alone. They've got a consortium of more than 50 other major national companies who are all banding together and saying, hey, there's an alternative way that we can learn these skills and we can demonstrate them. And that's what the certificate program is about. But also, companies like Amazon, again, do a fantastic job of trying to figure out how to help create lifelong learners. For companies that have some sort of tuition reimbursement, the problem is that it's reimbursement. You have to get paid first, and then you get reimbursed. What we need to see is that these companies have to pay it forward from the beginning. Another final example, a great resource, is Guild Education. Guild Education works with employers to help take advantage of other resources, help make sure that employees can get the education they need. They have educational counselors who work with people to figure out what degrees will be most powerful, which ones will be easiest, and where they can get the resources. They help work on financial aid so that we can truly take advantage of all the resources that are out there. And Guild helps people do that. Again, another fantastic resource to consider. So when we talk about what 2020 has for the future, we don't know for sure, but we do see 5 key directions of things that we can do today to be getting ready to be prepared for tomorrow. We have to stop repeating repetitive reiterations, develop those high-touch, very powerful human skills. We need to evolve the apprenticeship model in America, focus not just on degrees, but also how skills play in and how we quantify them, and make sure that we're building systems for lifelong learning. Look, no one is going to forget 2020, right? It is a crazy year. No one ever saw this coming. But what we can do, instead of looking backwards, instead of looking at this year and wondering what the heck happened, instead, put on our 2020 glasses and have foresight rather than hindsight. I want to thank you again for being a part of this. I want to thank you for being willing to listen to what I've got and what we've discovered. This is a real opportunity for us. Rather than get scared, use that 2020 foresight to plan for the future. Thank you all very much. Thank you for everything that you do. We're going to take some more questions, but one of the things I just think is really important to keep in mind is that we need to stay strong, stay healthy, and stay positive. And if you can do those 3 things, 2020 will be no problem. So with that, Chris, I'm going to hand it off to you and see what kind of questions we've got.
Great, thank you, Josh. I can only say that you've given us so much to think about, and all of it would have been relevant pre-2020 in the work that NATO's members are involved in. And so it's even much more important now with the work we're embarking on with respect to economic recovery in regions across the country. So we have one question to get us started here, which is, does a significant increase in population over the past several decades create additional challenges for the theory that technological advancements create jobs?
So again, there are interesting demographic shifts. So one of the things that prior to 2020, as we looked at the loss of jobs, it was actually going to be early offset by early retirements from the baby boom generation. What we're going to see is that part of the workforce was declining, and so it was actually going to even out. Unfortunately, again, being the accelerant that 2020 is, that process has gotten sped up. And so unfortunately, those demographic shifts won't help as much. But it's important as we look at job numbers to also consider that growth, both in terms of generations and in terms of immigration, right? Those things don't stand alone. They're all part of that big picture.
Thank you, Josh. I guess it looks like we're about to wrap up here. Thank you once again, Josh. This has been
Absolutely
incredibly enlightening. And I think all the data that you shared as well will be extremely useful for all of us in having these conversations back home in our own regions.
Yep.
We have a 15-minute break coming up at 12:45 Eastern Time. Will be the 2020 Alice Ann Woolbrook Impact Awards Showcase. It'll premiere on YouTube. For everybody who's participating in this session right now, Brett will be putting up the link to that in the chat box. So look there for a quick and easy transition. This will be a new way of showcasing just a few of the impact awardees this year. There were many, so I'd encourage you to check out the information on all of the 2020 Impact Award winners. After the showcase, you'll return to one of the rooms for breakout sessions that will start at 1:45. Those two are innovative approaches to public engagement or cybersecurity and the changing workplace. So once again, thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone for joining us.